Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel what is honestly one of the most fascinating and, yeah, kind of frustrating paradoxes in all of global economics. I mean, have you ever wondered why a country can have booming factories, literally millions of hardworking citizens, export numbers going through the roof, and yet, fundamentally, the country stays poor? Well, today, we're digging into exactly that. We're going to see why value addition is absolutely the only real path to the first world.
So let's just jump right in and pose the ultimate macroeconomic mystery, right? Why do so many countries industrialize but never actually get rich? For decades, the assumption across the board was basically, hey, put millions of people to work in factories, build products for the rest of the world, and immense national wealth is just naturally going to follow. But the data paints a very, very different reality. Turns out, just putting people to work is only one piece of the puzzle. Think about this for a second. Back in 1960, the World Bank tracked 101 middle-income economies. Want to guess how many actually made it to advanced high-income status by 2012? Exactly 13. Just 13 out of 101. We're talking about a half-century of effort, massive industrialization, global trade, and the vast majority of these developing nations just slammed into an invisible ceiling. They just couldn't break through. But don't worry, we're not just going to sit here and admire the problem. We're going to break down the solution. We've got a 6-step agenda today. 1. The middle income trap. 2. The value chain illusion. 3. Beware the Dutch disease. 4. Mastering the smile curve. 5. Upgrading to complex goods. And finally, 6. Becoming a headquarters economy.
All right, starting with number 1, the middle income trap.
Let's start with our medical diagnosis, essentially, of the developing economy, the middle income trap. This is when a country gets totally entrenched in a middle income range. It's like they're stuck on a treadmill. They might be deeply integrated into global supply chains, right? Physically assembling millions of complex devices, and their manufacturing output is just skyrocketing. But the catch? The average citizen stays poor because the national income simply isn't rising at the same pace. They've got the rapid expansion, but they just don't have the domestic industrial depth that actually generates the wealth.
Which leads perfectly into part 2, the value chain illusion.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, because it explains why building global products doesn't automatically mean keeping global profits. You've got to look at the split between GDP, gross domestic product, and GNI, gross national income. In a lot of these middle-income countries, modern manufacturing is entirely dominated by foreign firms. They bring in imported parts, use cheap local labor to put it all together and ship it out. Now, because that assembly happens inside the country, the GDP goes up. It looks like successful industrialization. But actually, those foreign firms just pack up the profits and send them right back home. And the wages paid to the locals, well, they often leak right back out of the country to buy imported goods because the local supply chain is just too weak. So you end up with high manufacturing output, but totally stagnant national wealth.
Moving on to Section 3. Beware the Dutch disease.
Now you might be thinking, okay, forget factories. What if a country is just sitting on a massive reserve of oil or copper or precious minerals? That's a guaranteed ticket to the top, right? Actually, no way. A massive commodity boom can literally be a severe curse in disguise. In economics, this phenomenon is famous as the Dutch disease.
Here's what happens. When you hit a commodity boom, foreign money just floods in. But ironically, that causes your country's real exchange rate to appreciate. Your currency gets way too expensive. Suddenly, everything else you try to export, like manufactured goods, is totally uncompetitive on the global market. That ends up crowding out your non-booming sectors and causes what we call premature deindustrialization. Your whole economy shifts away from making things and moves towards less productive, non-tradable stuff like construction. So, leaning purely on natural resources can actively destroy your ability to build a complex, resilient economy.
All right, Section 4, mastering the smile curve.
This is arguably my favorite visual metaphor for solving this whole paradox, the smile curve. Just look at the U shape here. On the horizontal axis, you have the stages of a global value chain: pre-production, production, and post-production. But on the vertical axis, you see how much economic value is actually created. Notice the very bottom of the curve? That's the physical production, the actual making and assembling of things. It generates the lowest value added. Why? Because honestly, assembly can be done by almost anyone, anywhere. It is fiercely competitive. The real wealth? That's captured way up on the upward edges of the smile. Pre-production stuff like R&D and post-production stuff like branding and logistics.
Effectively, this splits the world into two distinct types of economies. Over on the left, you've got the factory economy. They're stuck at the bottom of that smile. Brutal competition, razor-thin margins, labor-intensive assembly. It's basically the commodification of production. But on the right, you have the headquarter economy. They live up on the high edges of the curve, doing the R&D, the design, the branding, and their position is protected by intellectual property, which lets them capture high monopoly rents. It's a completely different, totally sheltered, and incredibly profitable reality.
Which brings us to number 5, upgrading to complex goods. So the million-dollar question: how does a country stop being just a factory and force its way up the edges of that smile curve? It all comes down to economic complexity. True national wealth doesn't just sprout from physical capital or natural resources. It comes from embedded knowledge. It's about a nation's capability to produce really complex, diverse, high-tech goods. If you want true economic freedom, you absolutely have to undergo a structural transformation, away from the simple stuff everyone can make and toward complex innovations that almost nobody else can replicate.
Now, escaping that trap is tough, but there's a proven strategic sequence here. First, yes, you do integrate into global value chains just to get a foothold. But step 2 is crucial. You've got to use deliberate policies to build domestic supplier linkages so your purchasing power stops leaking overseas. Third, you have to upgrade your institutional quality. If you don't have good governance, you fall into a complexity trap where your technological gains are basically ruined. And finally, step 4, shifting to indigenous technological innovation. Without making that final leap, research shows countries just slam into a glass ceiling around $14,800 GDP per capita. At that point, just being a factory actually becomes a huge drag on your economic growth.
And our final section, number 6, becoming a headquarter economy.
Bringing it all together, let's look at the ultimate destination. The global division of labor isn't just about geography anymore, it is a profound technological asymmetry. The global economy is completely structurally divided. Developing countries act as the factory economies, providing the abundant, unskilled labor. Meanwhile, the developed countries act as headquarter economies. They provide the knowledge, they hold the blueprints, and they arrange the production networks. To become a first-world nation, you simply cannot just be the hands of the global economy. You have to become the brain.
And the underlying research really hammers this home. As they put it, escaping the middle-income trap requires a shift in the functional specialization towards more knowledge-intensive pre-production and post-production functions. Basically, moving up the value chain, adding value through your intellect, your design, and your innovation isn't just some nice-to-have option. It is a mandatory structural transition to survive and thrive. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the illusions of GDP to the competitive realities of the smile curve. But I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. Take a look around at the industries driving your own local economy right now. Ask yourself, is your country building the factory, or are you designing the blueprint? Because honestly, the answer to that question will tell you exactly where your economy is heading in the decades to come. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions and keep learning.